Welcome everybody. We'll just give a few minutes to let people trickle in here. Okie dokie. Awesome. Thanks everybody for joining. I'm sure there'll be some. One sec.
Sorry, Arjun has some problems with his connection. Hey, everybody, it's Dima, CEO of the Everclear Foundation. I think we're starting right now, and when we'll get Arjun back, Arjun, you here? He can probably make a quick intro, and then we'll walk through the presentation where we'll walk you through the recent updates and what contributors are working right now. Arjun, you here?
Yeah, I'm here. I think I cut out for a second, but yeah, as Dima mentioned, like the goal of this call is to give a high-level update on where things are going for Everclear. We want to recap everything that happened over the incredibly eventful Q3. And so we'll kick off by a short update from Dima, who's the CEO of the foundation, just introduce himself, on the high levels of Everclear's vision and strategy, and then go into kind of more specific updates over the course of the call. Cool. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions as well, if anyone has any.
Okay. Hey, everyone. Before I start, we dropped a link where you can ask your questions, and in the end, just as Arjun said, we'll go through them. I will quickly begin from a quick market update and then what kind of problem we're solving as a quick recap for everyone. Let's go to the next page, Matt. Yes, quick market update. First, we can see that chains keep proliferating. Gelato and Conduit made it super easy to spin out a new chain, and we see a chain explosion. But there is something new happening, right? We see a wave of app chains with Unichain. It's a dawn of completely new type of applications connected to chains, and we can expect that more things will happen, like Revolut launching chain, 1inch launching chain, UIDX launching chain. From one hand, it worsens the liquidity fragmentation, but from another end, it kind of flips the thesis for general purpose chain. And we internally might think that it might be actually bearish for general purpose chains. Let's see what will happen next year. Second thing is that intent-based bridging is winning. So as we all know how intents work, it's when liquidity providers professionally upfront their capital to the end user in exchange for a fee. And it works in a very efficient way. And I don't know if you have heard about Across's presentation at ECC, but Hart basically explained how it works, and this is extremely effective. And more protocols move in this direction right now, including Wormhole, and they're launching their intent layer real soon. Third, chain abstraction is gaining momentum. I don't know if you follow the space, but chain abstraction captured over 1% of the mind share. If you look at Kaito analytics, it's a really hot topic right now. And there are conferences, there are people talking about that. You might have seen the ecosystem map from the rollup that explains how many projects are in there right now. And yeah, there are more and more interesting use cases coming out. Another thing that is interesting, we expect that some cross-chain AI agents might happen really soon next year. And I guess some of you might have followed Truth Terminal story, where basically there is an AI agent that tweets and it's somehow created like its own cult, and then there is the token. And yeah, I think more things like that will be happening next year, which might be also interesting for Everclear and other protocols in the space, and we're researching this area as well. And then finally, there is an intensifying competition between sexes, but also between sexes and dexes. And everybody's trying to compete on the product offering. And one of the important avenues is, of course, chain expansion, right? Which chains people can deposit and withdraw from. So that's a quick market overview. But then let's go to the problem that the space has to solve and that we're solving as well. Matt, to the next slide, please. We call it the rebalancing hot potato. So when you do intent-based bridging, there is always a need to bring funds back to the origin chain. How it works, this is a little bit of a pyramid. It starts from users who want to offload complexity to the bridges, right? They want to have cheap and really fast transactions. And right now, bridges compete a lot for this user order flow, right? You can look at Stargate or Across, prices are extremely cheap, like below a few bips. And bridges, they are trying to offload this complexity to solvers, but solvers right now also struggle. They quite often don't make any money at all because liquidity providers want to have really high APIs, but users want to have really low fees, and the two kind of don't match, right? It's really hard to satisfy both sides of the equation. And solvers, to make some cheap and easy rebalancing, go to SEXs, to centralized exchanges. But centralized exchanges also face complexity and operational problems, right? Because they have to hold lots of inventory, and sometimes they have to go to institutional protocols like Bitfinex to rebalance. So altogether, it's a big problem and a little bit of a hot potato. So what are the possible solutions? And let's think about it together. Next page, please. First, you of course can burn and mint different tokens, right? So XRC is one, OFT is another, and there are many different standards. and they just create and worsen the fragmentation. Of course, you can go and grow the number of solvers, but just as I said, the solver unit economics are fundamentally broken. Superchains, of course, there is discussion about OP stack or elastic chain or Arbitrum orbit, but bridging between different ecosystems is still needed, and there has to be a solution. Some people might say that the answer is vertical integrations, just like Coinbase and Base. This is a crypto exchange, this is a chain, and it feels like a very good UX, to be honest. But still, there has to be some traffic going on between such vertically integrated ecosystems and others. And finally, a possible solution is just holding lots of liquidity on spokes on different chains, right? And there are different well-known approaches with 400 million plus pools. They're great for users, but internally, probably they're not very sustainable because the utilization of the capital of such pools is quite low. And LPs, as we know, want to have higher APIs. So what are the ramifications of basically not solving this problem? Let's go to the next page. We sort of need to get to a place where there are, next one, where there are real efficiency gains for the system, right? And right now there is no system for everyone in the market to coordinate capital flows and settlement between chains. And if it stays like that, then Web 3 might never reach mass adoption. Okay, so from this point, we would like to tell you about one little insight, and you might have heard about it from us. This is called netting. If you look at different cross-chain flows, and let's look at their different page. We did this analysis back in April, and there was around 80% of cross-chain flows that can be netted. What it actually means, in any given day, there is 80% of flows that are breached out from any single chain, right? And our basic assumption is that you can just net them all. Based on this premise, we are building Everclear as a group of different contributors and different teams. And we are introducing chain abstraction stack, and Everclear is the foundation of it. So what is basically Everclear and how it fits to the ecosystem? On the top, we have permissions and wallets. Protocols like Particle, Near, Safe. This is where users initiate their intents. Then there are auctions, and we have protocols like Aori across Uniswap X, Socket, which are very important for the ecosystem, and this is where solvers are being selected. Then, of course, we have the layer of solvers, and you have Kalani, you have Anso, Ember across Wintermute who are actually executing the intents. But just as we said, something else is needed to bring more efficiency to the system, and this is Everclear. What we do, we basically provide the path to the best settlement, and we net off bidirectional invoices and flows. But of course, underneath of all this stack, we have transport protocols like Hyperlane and others, modular blockchains, and sexes. In terms of the solution, and I think it's important for you to understand a little bit better how Everclear protocol works, I would love to hand it over to Lane, and she'll walk you through how things work right now and where the protocol stands in terms of abstraction.
Cool. So, yeah, going to the next slide. Yeah, first, Everclear is the first clearing layer, and how you can really think about this is it's a marketplace for cross-chain liquidity. So basically, as it stands right now, there's nowhere where like you can match like wants across different blockchains. For example, if I'm transferring from Arbitrum to Optimism and 10 USDC, and somebody else is transferring 10 USDC from Optimism to Arbitrum, there should be a coordination mechanism where we can just trade those immediately. And that's what Everclear is designed to do. So the ideal world, we'd be able to net off all of these flows and match them immediately without really taking any major fees. But of course, we can only reach about 80% of the netting. So or 80% of the flows being netted across each other in this way. So what happens to the other 20% is we gradually start auctioning off that liquidity until a market maker or arbitrager can come in and is willing to purchase those flows and get the rewards that was discounted. So yeah, for example, if I'm going from Arbitrum to Blast and there's nobody who's coming from Blast, then and sending 10 USDC, then that USDC would get discounted to like 9.99, 9.98 until it's profitable for an arbitrager to come in and go the other way. So we can look a little bit about how exactly this works on a technical level. So you have an intent spoke, spokes on each chain, which hold all of the funds that are eventually going to be netted or market made across the hub, which is the central point in this system that matches all of the liquidity. Our hub is an Arbitrum Orbit rollup and is specifically designed to only be matching these liquidity across all of the chains that we support. So once you create an invoice on a given spoke, you can specify that you want it to go to multiple different destinations if that's your preference, which we often find for solvers or rebalancers. They don't have the same user profile as like an average person who supports multiple blockchains with their own profile. They're able to, they generally have a bunch of liquidity that piles up on some domain. And they want to rebalance this across multiple different domains, but they're less opinionated about exactly how much should go into each place. For example, me as a user, when I'm transferring, I very much want my 10 USDC to go to a specific place. For a solver, when they're transferring across chains or rebalancing their profile, they may end up with a big chunk of money on BNB, for example, if there's large flows out of BNB for their protocol. And they need to rebalance that to Optimism, Arbitrum, and Polygon, but are less opinionated about where exactly that invoice lands of those three domains. Once you create these invoices, if there's nobody to match your flows, they start to get discounted and auctioned off, at which point an arbitrager can come in and purchase them for a profit by providing the extra liquidity that the system needs. So the benefits of this depend on the different user class. The one really nice advantage that we like is on the spokes, there's a really thin on-chain footprint, and most of the complexity of the system is offloaded to the hub. What that means is it's really easy for us to support alternate VMs outside of just the EVM. And like, it's very easy to port that logic and house the complexity in a single chain that we control. For bridges, this means that if they integrate into the spokes directly, there's lower costs. They don't have to manage their inventory, like that's all handled on the spokes themselves, and it's a pretty straightforward integration. For solvers, like I said, they have this opportunity to just kind of set it and forget it and have their liquidity be rebalanced across all the chains that they support. There's also like access to long tail chains and alternate VMs coming soon. And there's more arbitrage opportunities for them if they want to also purchase the invoices or purchase the cross-chain liquidity flow that's been created in the network. For sexes, there's also a lot of benefits, primarily around being able to manage their liquidity much better. So right now, sexes are holding a lot of idle assets on a bunch of different chains, and they're responsible for figuring out ways to rebalance that. Those assets are generally accrued through deposits and are designed to support withdrawals. However, they also experience imbalanced flows for each sex. And so while they don't have a good way to move the funds that they've received through deposits to where they need it to be for withdrawals, they have idle liquidity that's just sitting there. So being able to use something like Everclear creates a much easier or much more capital efficient system for their own products. Cool. So we did launch very recently, and we're proud to say that we've been seeing a lot of improvements over our previous bridging systems. Number one being like the fees are closing in to be much, much lower than what we were seeing in Amarok or even NXTP prior to that, or for those who've been following for a long time, Vector. We are seeing a 2 BIP average fee over the last 7 days. A lot of that comes from the 48% of nettable volume. That's not quite where we'd like to be in terms of the theoretical optimum of 80%, but we have a lot of improvements coming in the pipeline for the protocol that will hopefully get us closer to that number. And we're also seeing at least $2 million of cleared volume across the top 5 EVM chains. We're also seeing a massive decrease in the fees that we're charging. Again, these fees generally come from an imbalance of of invoices and cross-chain liquidity flows as your invoices get auctioned off to create an opportunity for arbitrageurs. So we're seeing those fees decrease over 3x in the last 30 days as the netting has increased. And again, we're still only at 48%, so we expect these fees to drop down much further. Now I'd like to introduce Matthew, who's our head of growth, who can talk more about the traction that we've been getting in the latest version of the protocol. And yeah.
Hey, thanks so much, everyone. Yeah, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Matthew. I oversee growth here at Everclear Foundation. And yeah, really excited to talk about the early results we're seeing with the new protocol. As Lane mentioned, we're seeing some pretty staggering statistics as we pace towards being one of the most cost-effective solutions on the market, drastically reducing rebalancing costs. And we're seeing that in the mainnet beta. So we're starting to onboard a number of solvers, DeFi, and chains to support this system. That includes like Router, Synapse, Toka Labs, Dialectic, and Aori, who are already online, with a number of others in the pipeline. We also have a very strong set of like DeFi portfolio and XERC20 projects that are also in pipeline ready to be integrated. And so, yeah, let's jump into some of the progress we've seen over the last quarter. So one of the biggest ones that many of you may have joined us for was the launch of the inaugural Abstract Summit. So Abstract Summit is a one-day event that is dedicated towards basically looking into all of the various methods towards improving the state of usability throughout the Web3 ecosystem. This goes from infrastructure projects like ourselves to efforts like ENS or SocialFi or otherwise that really impact our ability to move towards mass adoption. We're really happy to report that we had an incredible event at Token 2049 that was oversubscribed throughout the day and hosted 30 plus speakers from amazing protocols like Coinbase, Eigenlayer, Celestia, Pantera, and a number of others. And we're really excited to bring this back for the second iteration. So if you will be joining us at DevCon, we would love to see you there. It'll be hosted on the 12th. And if you jump over to our Twitter to this live stream, you should see a reply there that has an RSVP link. Keep in mind, we were over capacity throughout the event last time. And so if you'd like to join us, please go ahead and RSVP there. And we're excited to see you in Thailand. So one of the big things that we've been quite proud of is the media traction that we've seen as we went through the rebrand towards Everclear. And so just this morning, we had an amazing Masari report released, and it sounds like there's more coverage on that end in the pipeline. We also released the Renzo case study, which is an exploration of how we enabled the first large-scale chain abstraction application, resulting in over $1 billion of additional accrued TVL as we brought Renzo to a number of layer 2s. We've seen amazing coverage on both the rebrand and the new financial primitive from The Block, Tiger Research, Masari, Kairos, and many others. And we will link to all of those in the Twitter thread, and we'll do a recap of this stream as well to cover that. So with that, I'll actually go ahead and turn it back over to Lane for a few more updates. Let's bring Lane back on stage.
Cool. So I want to talk about some of the improvements that we already have in the pipeline and where we can go in the next year. So all of this is pending how the in-progress upgrade pans out and how the market receives it and some of the feedback there. So the first thing that we are really excited to ship is an improvement over the auction mechanism. Right now, it's a little bit naive, and it just says, okay, I'll discount this invoice by this amount if it's not been like matched with other liquidity in this time frame. That doesn't give users a lot of preference over kind of what prices they're willing to accept and how long they're willing to wait to get to those prices. So the first upgrade that we'll have to our protocol is V1.1, which we're calling internally the Diablo upgrade. And it's a system that adds an RFQ system to the existing auction. We also plan to expand to alt VMs. As I said, this is a lot easier given the low on-chain footprint of the spokes. We want to improve the roll-up security by switching to an AVS-based system and switching our DA layer. We also think that we can have large improvements for market makers rebalancing and having liquidity available to purchase invoices quickly by adding AMM or OTC infra to our chain. We can explore adding an intent layer directly and becoming a user-facing bridge again by having our own solver layer. We're also interested in exploring a CeFi product and potentially adding some liquidity pools for solvers to easily access capital. Those are all the protocol possible directions. On the foundation, there's also a lot more interesting stuff, including integrating with CEX's chain expansion, continuing to drive the chain abstraction through other events like Abstract Day, and continuing to be the key drivers and leaders of that side of the ecosystem, as well as bringing more solvers and intent-based bridges on board to use the protocol directly. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about v1.1 here and kind of what we expect to see and how we expect it to improve the system. So v1.1 is a hub-centric model, and what we mean by that is instead of having the market makers purchase invoices by also depositing onto the spokes in the place where the liquidity is demanded, we can have them deposit into the spokes and have credits available to trade on the hub. What that will allow them to do is it will allow them to purchase invoices directly on the hub. So you can have an experience that's really similar to how arbitrageurs would interact with a Uniswap pool, where if they don't make a certain profit, the transaction would automatically revert. This has a lot of implications. One is the user fees decrease a lot. The primary driver of our user fees right now is that kind of auction mechanism, and arbitrageurs have to wait a little bit for the invoices to be discounted more than we'd like to make sure that their gas costs and operational costs are covered because of the long process to get funds from spoke to hub and to also continue depositing on the desired destination spoke. We expect the user-facing fees to be, the minimum user-facing fees to be about 1 BPS or slightly less. On the protocol fees for market makers, this is another reason why we're seeing the higher fees right now. Well, higher fees being 1.5 to 3 BPS, so not incredibly high. But one of the reasons is because we charge a protocol fee for market makers. As we switch to the hub-centric model to give kind of this enshrined user class into the protocol, we'll see like a decrease in the fees that are charged there to zero as the arbitrageurs are creating and purchasing invoices. One of the other things that I think is the main improvement here is how efficient the arbitrageurs are able to be with their capital. So across all bridges, you have this kind of cycle time, which is like how easy or how long I have to wait as someone who's provided destination chain liquidity to get my money back, how long I'm out of pocket essentially before I can start using it again in other opportunities. We call this the cycle time. For most bridges, it's about 8 per day, which means like you can have to wait 3 hours to get your liquidity back, and then you can spend it again and chase other opportunities. For our current status, it's 8 to 24 hours a day, and it's primarily determined by like how long it takes for an arbitrageur's intent to make it through the through the hub and back to their specified destination chains. Because we won't be doing that and we'll be purely hub-centric in 1.1, we could have up to over 14,000 cycles a day. And that's 10 per minute. So that means that like the liquidity required to service volume drops a lot and the market maker returns increase. In terms of functionality, the market maker cost is low. Currently, the market maker cost is low. And they have async fill risk. So in the current system, we have multiple spokes. Arbitrageurs can provide, if it's a multi-destination intent, arbitrageurs can provide liquidity across any of those destinations, which means there's uncertainty at a higher level in terms of whether or not you will be the arbitrageur who actually does get the profit. This means that you have to be more conservative with the opportunities that you chase and also contributes to the larger user-facing fees. When you have this automatic revert, because you can just do it all on a single chain to purchase those invoices and match those flows, you'll be able to have a lot more certainty in terms of your expected returns, which will translate to faster invoice filling times and lower user fees as well. Cool, so we can go ahead to the next slide on governance. I'm gonna turn it over to Nadana, our head of people and talent, the foundation.
Hey everyone. So I'll share some recent highlights on that side today. So when it comes to past things that took place, a really important one is governance task force that was established 3 months ago, and they've brought significant improvement when it comes to the operations. So they have an open communication thread on the forum, and then also manage Everclear Twitter page, so you can follow for all the updates there. DAO has also established Everclear Delegates Call that is happening actually now for a long time, since the launch monthly monthly on Thursdays, and this is an open call, so we definitely encourage anyone interested to join and participate. And then the next is a Security Council upgrade. DAO has been working really hard on this one, so we're super happy the proposal finally passed just recently. So Security Council upgrade is introducing 9 signers now, including the lead. And the hope is this upgrade will make it a lot more efficient and faster, but then also more secure, because every member has a technical background needed to be able to review any proposed transactions. Finally, some other past proposals are Bootno Launchpad, next bonding token upgrade that we'll talk a bit more about later, V3 reward, and then inverter network, which are really all contributing to the overall development of the ecosystem. Then what's currently in progress is the nomial inventory access for Solver's RFC. There's actually a lot of comments on this one, and they're proposing to build an inventory access layer that solvers rebalancing through Everclear can utilize. The next one, also in RFC stage, is the volume task force, which previously was liquidity task force. They've over 7 months been super successful in boosting liquidity, and then if VTF now passes, they would focus on maximizing volume and liquidity growth while keeping Everclear competitive. And then another one, also in RFC stage, this should go to the vote soon, is really the DAO is exploring how governance structure may need to change with the new tokenomics to bolster community engagement, decision-making processes. And then a couple of things upcoming. Those are not on the forum yet, but first one is DAO Code of Conduct. It's definitely time to introduce RFC aimed at fostering respectful and productive environment within the DAO and all the platforms used for communications. And then the next one, which we should also see on the forum shortly, is grants program and then Borg proposal. This, if this passes, it should actually make it easier for the DAO to be able to provide grants, not just in Next, but also in stables as well. And now we can turn it back to Dima, the CEO of Everclear Foundation, to dive into the tokenomics proposal that the DAO passed.
Yeah, just as Naidana said, one of the largest proposals was the next bonding. So how it works, Everclear DAO has voted to implement vote bonding system. It means that first, Next holders can stake Next and receive VB Next. There will be a specific duration. VB Next holders will be receiving protocol fees, so there will be like a fees distribution. And all protocol fees that Everclear is earning will go to the DAO, right? Except just like network costs. And VB Next can be used to vote for chain expansion, right? And basically, VBNext holders will decide where the emissions have to go and which solvers will be incentivized, right? So there is definitely an incentive for new chains to stake Next to ensure that there is a robust Solver support for these chains. And the tokenomics is in the implementation right now. And as soon as it's finished, there will be more details. But this one is definitely a very important proposal and project for the protocol and contributors. On this note, we're getting closer to the end of the presentation. I'm handing it over to Arjun to talk about the team, and then we can start Q&A. Arjun, over to you.
Cool. Moving on to the team slide. So one of the big things that we've been focusing on this Q3 is really just like leveling up the team, especially as we head towards working more with like institutional partners like market makers and centralized exchanges. We realize that it's just really worthwhile for us to start hiring from those places, so that way we can just like level up the quality of communication that happens there, and make sure that we have a lot of internal context into like how centralized exchanges function, how market makers function, etc. So you've already kind of met Lane and Dima so far. Lane being one of my co-founders, and then the CEO of Labs, Proxima Labs, and then Dima being the CEO of the foundation, who came in last year to kind of like help run the organization. You've also you've also heard from Matthew so far, who runs growth at Foundation. In addition to that, we have a number of other really fantastic folks who have joined the team somewhat more recently. We have Andrew, who was previously doing product at RhinoFi, who has joined now the Everclear Foundation to kind of spearhead our product growth. And then we have Zach, who was previously working at Kraken, who has come in to help on like ops and strategy. Nikki, previously from Amber and Bitso, who is running a lot of the like liquidity and partnerships, basically a lot of like institutional relationships. And then Nikita, previously from Optimal, who is running BD at the foundation. Super excited to kind of have this team. We had an offsite recently where everybody was like all of the admin team were together for the first time, and it was honestly incredible to just experience how effectively a team can function when you have a bunch of like seasoned leaders that understand how the space works and are willing to kind of like go back and forth on figuring out a problem together. Cool. And yeah, without I guess any further ado, we do have a bit more time, about 20 minutes or so, and so we'll jump into Q&A from with the link in the chat. If you do have additional questions that are not in the Q&A yet, feel free to drop them in. There is a link that was distributed with the link to this restream in a bunch of different places on Discord and on Twitter. So yeah, let's jump into that. Cool. Should we, I guess, bring other people up here as well, in case there are other folks that want to answer things, and we can just go through these in order. So the first question is, can we expect VB Next before December 6th? Okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's something that so work on VB Next is like already ongoing. Part of that work will of course have to involve things like audits. That's something that is happening as quickly as possible, and the goal is to try to get it live before December 6th. But of course, there's never kind of any guarantee there. It will be subject to things like audit timelines. Yeah, I will say that the majority of the kind of like on-chain work with VB Next is complete. It's really going to be largely centered around like security and then like UIs and things like that going forward. Next question. ETA on Everclear v1.1. I think Lane is probably the best one to answer this.
Oh, well, you know, engineers hate giving deadlines. What I can say is it's actively under development. We're really hoping to ship it by Q1 of next year. But again, subject to audit timelines and things like that, but that's the target.
Awesome. Next question. ETA on the Connects bridge officially sunsetting. So it is officially sunsetting right now. There's a few things that kind of need to still stay online, and this has been part of the challenge that we've been struggling with, which is like, you know, the Connects bridge was used for a combination of different kinds of things. Like there was, of course, transfers of liquid assets between chains. So there are pools associated with that still have funds in them. And so to an extent, we need to keep UIs and things online so that we can give the requisite time for users to be able to go and withdraw from pools before we start looking like basically doing things like upgrading and like having like alternative ways for people to exit the system. Beyond that, there's also a secondary set of use cases that are still kind of live, associated with like XERC20 tokens that were launched on top of that kind of were deployed by different project teams, and then that leveraged the Connect protocol to be able to go and transfer to a bunch of different chains. Now, one of the challenges there is that like we have the capacity to expand Everclear really rapidly to a lot of different chains, and that's something that we're planning to do at some point, where we don't want to do that until we have kind of hit some of these like core metrics and hit the like stability and reliability benchmarks that we've kind of set for ourselves. But the challenge that we're running into is that some of these other chains are basically like some of these other protocols that have launched tokens using Everclear, like XERC20 tokens, are reliant on chains that are not yet live. And so we do have this like period of time where we kind of have to keep a little bit of both online while we work to migrate over all of those different token projects. That is also a bit of an ongoing process. I mean, this is something that I'm sure people will agree with, but like from our side, we want to sunset things as quickly as possible, just because we want to minimize like user pain, and we also want to put as many resources as we can towards the new system. And so we're hoping that over the course of the remainder of over the course of Q4, we should see like a big decrease in like usage in the old Connect system as much as possible. But we're kind of having to play it a little bit by ear, depending on what things look like as we get closer to the end of the year. Next question. Difference between VB and VE model. This is a great question. I'm happy to answer this. If someone else wants to take it, feel free, but I'm happy to answer this. So yeah, the question here is like, how does the Everclear VB Next token model compare to VE token models that are similar to things like Velodrome, or even some of the more like old school VE token models like Curve and Convex, right? There's basically some like core challenges associated with V tokens. One of the big challenges is that V tokens are like inherently extremely inflationary. They're inflationary because there's no mechanism to actually like reduce the token supply. There's only this mechanism where like tokens are continuously emitted, and you are incentivized to be in this kind of like race to the bottom, where if you don't lock up your tokens, then your token ownership is going to get diluted. This is something that is like helpful in some cases. It's helpful to kind of incentivize people to participate into locking tokens. And it's also helpful to kind of create this like B2B relationship that VE token models have with other organizations, where every organization wants to kind of like play this game to stay ahead, and to be able to get like emissions towards whatever it is that they need to go. However, the downside to this is that it makes VE tokens not always a great investment, because like when you're purchasing VE tokens, you are forced into the situation where you have to like continuously lock them. And there's no like decrease in the supply of the actual protocol, right? So if you're not locking your tokens, you're effectively losing money, and then there's no real mechanism to unlock tokens either. And so this is one of the big challenges that like investors into projects like Velodrome have today, which is like you have to go and lock your tokens. If you don't lock your tokens, you're losing money. And if you lock your tokens, you're now locked into the system for like 4+ years. And any new tokens you get, you are also locking the system for 4+ years. And so what's happening is that people are basically trying to OTC out their like locked VVelo, usually at like very, very steep discounts. What we wanted to do was kind of encapsulate a different way of thinking about this notion of locking. Like we still like this idea that you can direct emissions towards places that are voted on by people locking a token. But there's two things big things that we've changed. One, the mechanism is slightly different, such that VB Next is not just like permanently inflationary. In fact, it functions a little bit more like ETH, where during periods of like low protocol volume, high protocol liquidity, basically times at which there is capacity for the network to grow, the protocol is inflationary, because that will incentivize growth, right? It'll incentivize more people onboarding as chains, more people like driving volumes going to these different ecosystems, and therefore more incentives being paid out. And then during periods where there's a surplus of fees, so there's a lot more volume going through the system than there is needed liquidity, the protocol will become deflationary, which basically means that the fees that are being captured by the protocol can then go towards like reducing the total amount of VB next within the entire system. There's some really awesome mathematics around how this works in the like original proposal that I would definitely recommend that you check out from Vending Machine. The second piece that is important for this is that locked VB next is able to be exited early. So there's this notion of the ability to exit the system early, but with a discount penalty. In effect, we're basically like enshrining this mechanism where like these locked tokens are able to be OTC'd. Where as a user, if you go and you lock your tokens because you want to participate in the system, but a couple of years in, you say, okay, well, I actually want liquidity on this. You can go and unlock your tokens, but you might take a discount of like 30, 40% or something like that. We think that the combination of these two mechanisms really like fix and address some of the core problems with VE tokens. Now, there's a couple of other minor things that are slightly different, but we think that these two mechanisms are like really encapsulate the big kind of race to the bottom situation that exists with like systems like Velo today, and should hopefully make them a lot more sustainable in something like Everclear.
Okay, on that note, maybe I can take over and answer a few questions more. So, do you hear me, by the way? Okay, great. So what can we expect when can we expect the next supply to be verified on CoinMarketCap and CoinGecko? I think it's worthwhile to break it down into a few things. First, Foundation is working right now to provide bigger transparency on what happens with different, parts of the token supply. And it's something that we probably try to release and push out over Q4. The second thing, and you might have seen the news that Labs has decided to extend the token lockup for insiders, token holders, and key contributors as well. So the lockup schedule right now is not 12, but 18 months, and it starts later. So it had to start in September, but it was pushed back to December, right? So that's another piece. So Foundation is working on that right now. Second question, any plans to integrate with Arrakis's new HOT AMM? It's something that Everclear DAO will be deciding. It's not Labs or Foundation to take care of this. So I'll move to the next question. Are you happy with the protocol's volume growth across the weeks? Yes, we're happy. Why so? Right now, it's not a full mainnet launch, right? We are still in the guarded mainnet beta, where the only goal is to figure out how we can sustainably deliver amazing user experience. And just as Matthew shared, 20 minutes ago, we are achieving some important metrics. We're getting to a great netting. We're providing better and better prices, right? And after we improve it even further, that will be the time to scale, right? And just as also Lane shared, there is a V1.1 undergoing. That will be a step change in the protocol's efficiency, especially for market makers. And it's very important for us to make sure that market makers are getting great returns. So this is how I would answer this question. And the second one relates to that. So can you give an ETA for getting the Dwelling protocols live on mainnet? So we're working on integrations right now, but we're not rushing, right? As the Foundation specifically. We're trying to make it in a balanced way, and especially after V1.1, there will be more room for onboarding bigger protocols. In terms of new chains, so the question is, which new chains do we expect to be integrated into Everclear in the coming weeks? There are a few in the pipeline, including one non-EVM and one EVM, and there's a few more that would love to be onboarded by Everclear. But again, just as I said, Q4 is still this like beta phase, right? Like it's very early. The protocol was just shipped, right? And there is a lot of work that has to be done to make sure that it can scale. But good news is that protocol has an immense network effect. The bigger it is, the more efficient it is, specifically with netting, right? The more volume you can capture in the system, the more netting occurs, the cheaper the prices are. Final question, one more. Can we expect more tier 1 exchange listings when VB Next is live? we cannot answer that. It's not something that is in our control. All exchanges make decisions on their own, right? So it's not something that we can actually comment here because we don't control that. The current Discord rules don't allow for much discourse, especially for new users joining. Any plans to change the filter bot? Matthew, do you want to tackle this one?
Yeah, thanks so much for that. So the bot on Discord is basically prohibiting things that we deem as like off topic or unnecessary conversation. What I would encourage you to do is to submit a ticket or to reach out to our community admins like Tommy, Andy, and Stefan. They're all great and they're present in the server all the time. So if we are inadvertently kind of stifling conversation on the Discord, it's definitely not our intention. We try to use those bots just to keep things like on topic and make sure that there's no like scams and that we're protecting our users and our community. But yes, if that is inadvertently kind of stifling organic conversation, that's something we would love to know about. And so I would just encourage you to reach out to our community admins who can kind of either help you to understand why certain things are blocked, or again, if it's inadvertent, we can work to adjust those bots to help ease that conversation. So yeah, really, thank you so much for bringing that to our attention.
Next question is, can we touch on the internal AMM? Do you mean the internal RFQ system? So at the moment, Everclear does not have like an AMM based system. A part of this is like is kind of core to our thesis that like we think, as we mentioned earlier, that like leaving capital kind of sitting around in like large pools on different chains is not super efficient. This is similar to like the transition between like what happened with like Uniswap v2 to Uniswap v3, where having capital on a full range position all the time is also not very efficient, right? Concentrating that liquidity where users actually need it is a better model. That's kind of the mental model that we're operating with for the protocol as well, where like we want to minimize the total amount of capital that is just like sitting around. And so the system doesn't have an AMM internally. Instead, it has a model that looks more like a more direct auction, and eventually like we're kind of getting closer to like order book.
So yeah, I just wanted to add to that, if in case the question was referring to something that we mentioned on future protocol directions with the market maker based AMM or exchange. So one of the ways that V1.1 works is it allows market makers to deposit into the hub via the spokes to get credit for which they can settle invoices. What that means is they will get a representation on our chain of like op USDC if they deposited into an Optimism spoke. Say they purchase an invoice that's headed to Optimism but originates from Arbitrum. What they would get instead is like ARB USDC as a result of purchasing that invoice. Now, this means that market makers in the system will experience a similar kind of rebalancing problem, but all on the same chain. So when we're talking about market maker AMMs, it was to have market makers who all hold liquidity on the hub chain be able to quickly and efficiently rebalance without leaving that chain. So imagine in that same scenario, I have an AMM that's like swapping op USDC to ARB USDC. And then if I like would rather hold op USDC and withdraw my funds there, I can switch all on the hub chain before withdrawing and claiming my funds to the canonical chain on which I deposited them or they originated. So that's more of the reference.
Okay, well, it looks like that's it for now, right? Thank you for the questions. And yeah, if you have any feedback, always feel free to, drop it on Twitter, DMs, or in any possible way. We would love to hear how did you enjoy the community call, and we're planning to do that on a quarterly basis. So the next one probably will be in January. Yeah, and thank you for being with us. Have a great rest of the week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.